Okay, let's talk about Vue.js. It's a really popular framework for building user interfaces, and the cool thing is that it's designed to grow with you. Basically, it helps you create dynamic websites and apps by making things like updating content when data changes super easy. It uses something called reactive data binding, so when your data changes, the screen updates automatically. You'll also notice a lot of applications are built using components. These are reusable building blocks that make development faster and easier. Finally, Vue leverages a virtual DOM to efficiently update the web page only where needed, leading to much better performance. Okay, let's talk about how Vue stacks up against React and Angular. Really common question in interviews. React is fantastic as a library. It's all about the Vue part of your application, but you often need to piece together other tools for things like routing and managing data. Angular, on the other hand, is this huge framework that gives you everything you need right out of the box. It's structured and can be great for bigger projects, but it can take a bit longer to learn initially. Vue's really special because it's progressive. You can add it to your existing project easily or build something massive with it, and it generally has a smoother learning curve than Angular while still giving you a lot of control. Okay, let's talk about why Vue is such a great choice for web projects. First off, it uses a component-based architecture. Think of building your website like assembling Lego bricks. Each brick component is reusable and easy to manage. Next, its reactivity system is amazing. You don't have to manually update the screen when data changes. Vue handles that automatically. It's also really easy to pick up, even if you're new to frameworks, but still has plenty of power for advanced developers. Plus, it utilizes a virtual DOM which makes updates super efficient, and there's a fantastic community backing it up. Okay, let's talk about the Vue instance. It's a really important concept to understand. Basically, every Vue app has one main thing called an instance. It's like the boss of your application. This instance is where all your data lives, and it's also responsible for keeping everything synchronized when that data changes. When you update something in your data, Vue automatically updates what you see on the screen. No manual updating needed. And it figures out exactly what asterisk to show based on that data. You'll mainly be talking to the instance through its methods, properties, and computed properties. Okay, let's talk about directives in Vue. Think of them as superpowers for your templates. They're special attributes that help you control how the DOM reacts to changes in your data. Essentially, they're shortcuts for manipulating elements and handling events. We've got a few common ones like Vue model, which makes two-way binding super easy. You can directly edit the input field and it updates your data. Then there's Vue used for event listeners, and vbind, which lets you dynamically set attributes based on your data. They're a fundamental part of making Vue really powerful. Okay, let's talk about how Vue handles conditional rendering. We have three main tools for this: vif, vshow, and velse. Vif is like a hard switch. If the condition is true, it completely removes the element from the DOM. If it's false, the element vanishes entirely. On the other hand, vshow is more subtle. It doesn't actually remove the element. Instead, it just toggles its visibility using CSS. This makes it generally faster for initial rendering because Vue doesn't have to recreate the entire DOM structure every time. Finally, velse isn't a standalone directive. You typically use it within an if or else if block to define what should be displayed when the preceding condition is false. Think of it as providing an otherwise option. Okay, let's talk about components. In Vue.js, a component is really just a self-contained piece of your user interface, like a mini app within your bigger application. It's designed to be reusable, so you can use it again and again without having to rewrite the code each time. Think of things like buttons or forms. They are often built as components. Each component has its own HTML, the structure, JavaScript, the behavior, and CSS, the styling, all neatly packaged together. This makes your application much easier to maintain because if you need to change something, you only have to modify the component itself, not hunt it down throughout the entire app. They also use props, which are like inputs that you can pass into a component, and they can even emit events, allowing them to talk to other components. Okay, let's talk about components. They're a core part of Vue. Vue.js and a really important topic for interviews. To start with, you can create components in a couple of ways, either by defining them directly within a file using the standard template, script, and style tags, or dynamically through Vue's createApp method. Once you've created your component, you need to register it so Vue knows about it. There are two main approaches here: global registration and local registration. Global registration makes your component available throughout your entire application, while local registration limits its scope to the parent component where it's registered. We'll look at an example of how to do this globally using Vue component, which is a common pattern. Okay, let's talk about the Vue component lifecycle. It's a really important concept for any Vue developer. Think of it like stages in a life cycle. A component goes through different phases as it's created, used, and eventually removed from your application. First, there's the create stage, where the component is just being built but isn't actually visible on the screen yet. Then comes mount, which is when the component finally appears in the DOM, and you can start setting up things like event listeners. Next, when data changes, we have the update phase. This is where Vue's reactivity system kicks in to efficiently update what you see on the screen. Finally, when a component is no longer needed, it goes through a mount, where its resources are cleaned up and released. The key lifecycle hooks like onCreated, onMounted, and before a mount give you control points to manage different tasks at these different stages. Okay, let's talk about two really important hooks in Vue.js: created and mounted. Think of created as your initial setup phase. It runs right after the component is built, but asterisk before asterisk is actually added to the web page. This is a great time to fetch data from an API or do any calculations you need before things get visual. Now, mounted is where the real action happens. This hook fires asterisk after asterisk the component and all its children have been attached to the DOM. That means it's perfectly safe to start playing with the elements on your page, adding event listeners, changing styles, whatever you need. The big difference? Created prepares things behind the scenes, while mounted actually makes those changes visible on the screen. Let's talk about the Vue CLI. It's essentially your starting point for any Vue project. Think of it as a pre-built toolkit that handles all the messy groundwork, so you can focus on building your application. It generates a basic project structure with everything you need to get started, including a super handy hot reloading development server, meaning changes are instantly reflected in your browser as you code. Plus, it takes care of the production build, bundling up your code and assets for deployment. And, best of all, it supports plugins, which is fantastic for adding extra features like linting or CSS preprocessors. Okay, so let's talk about props and data in Vue.js. Data is essentially what a component asterisk owns asterisk. It's like its internal memory or the information it needs to keep track of to do its job. Think of things like user input, current values, whatever the component needs internally to function. Then you have props. These are how your parent components pass data asterisk down asterisk to their children. They are a way for the parent to tell the child what to display or how it should behave. Generally, a child shouldn't try to change props. They're meant to be read only and control how the child presents information. Okay, let's talk about how we get data flowing between different parts of our Vue application. The most straightforward method is using props. Think of them like passing information asterisk down asterisk from a parent component to its child. The child receives this data as an object called props. Next up are events. Child components can shout out when something changes, and their parent components listen for those shouts. Finally, while it's less common, we have $emit, which lets a component tell its parents about updates, and then there's $refs, which gives us direct access to the DOM, but generally, you want to avoid using this unless you absolutely need to. Okay, let's talk about Vuex. Think of it as the central hub for all the information your Vue.js application needs to know. It's an official library that helps you manage data in a predictable and organized way. Basically, it keeps everything: user settings, product details, anything in one place, making it easy for different parts of your app to access and use the same information. When you're building bigger applications with lots of connected components, Vuex really shines because it helps ensure that data is consistent across the whole thing. It's especially useful when dealing with global state like user logins or shopping carts. Okay, let's talk about Vue.js. At its heart, Vue.js is all about managing data in a predictable and organized way, especially as your application grows. First up, we have state, which represents the core data of your app, everything from user information to product details. Next, mutations are the only asterisk way you can change that state directly. They're like little functions that tell Vue.js what to do with the data, but they must be pure, meaning they don't have any side effects and always produce the same result for the same input. Then there are actions, which handle asynchronous operations, things like fetching data from an API or setting a timer. Actions then dispatch mutations. Finally, getters let you create derived values based on your state, making it easier to work with complex data in your components. Think of them as computed properties for your application's data. Okay, let's talk about computed properties versus methods in Vue. They both handle logic, but they work differently. Computed properties get re-evaluated automatically whenever their dependencies change, making them great for derived data that should always stay up to date, like formatting a date or calculating a value based on other reactive variables. Think of it as a read-only version of the logic. Methods are functions you call directly. They can do anything, and they aren't automatically updated when dependencies change. So, if you need to perform an action, like sending a form submission or updating some state, that's where methods shine. Just remember to explicitly call them. Okay, let's talk about watchers in Vue. Essentially, they're Vue's way of automatically reacting to changes in your data. Think of them like built-in dependency tracking. If you declare that you want to know when a specific piece of information updates, the watcher will keep an eye on it and fire off a little notification whenever it does. It's super handy for things like updating form validation or dynamically rendering different parts of your UI based on what's happening in your data. Okay, let's talk about routing in Vue.js. Vue Router is the official way to handle navigation within your application. It lets you switch between different views seamlessly. First, you need to install it, just a simple npm install Vue Router. Then you create a router instance and tell it which routes to use, usually with the map method. You can also define dynamic route parameters for things like user ID or product numbers. And finally, navigation guards let you control when a page loads based on certain conditions, like checking if a user is logged in. For performance optimization, consider lazy loading components associated with specific routes. Okay, let's talk about Vue Router. It's basically how you handle navigation within your Vue.js application. Think of it as a map that tells your app where to go when someone clicks a link or uses the back button. Vue Router lets you create single-page applications, meaning users don't have to reload the entire page every time they move around. It's all built using components, making things really organized and easy to manage. It has great features like handling dynamic routes, those with changing numbers or ID in the URL. And if your application gets complex, nested routes let you build a clear hierarchy for navigation. Configuration is pretty straightforward. You define routes as an array of objects, each with a path and a Vue component that should be displayed when that path is matched. We'll see an example right here showing how to set it up in a simple router file. Okay, let's talk about single file components, or SFC as they're commonly called in Vue. Think of them as a super organized way to build your components. Basically, each component lies in its own file, and that single file contains everything you need for it: the HTML structure, the JavaScript logic to make things happen, and any specific CSS styles that only apply to that particular component. This keeps your code neat, makes it easier to reuse parts of your application across different areas, and generally helps with keeping things manageable as your project grows. Okay, let's talk about a really common Vue question: how VModel compares to using value init input. Think of VModel as the quick and easy way to connect an input field directly to your data. It handles all the updates automatically for you. Whenever something changes in the input, it instantly reflects in your data, and vice versa. It's fantastic for things like text boxes or checkboxes, where you just want a simple, direct link. However, if you need more control over how the value is updated, or if you have some custom logic involved, say, you want to format the input as it changes, then using value in conjunction with init input event listener gives you that extra flexibility. You'll need to write a little bit of code yourself to handle those updates. Essentially, vModel is your go-to for simplicity, while the other approach lets you build more complex interactions. Okay, let's dive into slots in Vue.js. Slots are a really neat way to make your components more reusable and flexible. Think of them as placeholders where you can insert content from the parent template. There are two main types: default slots. These take whatever content is passed into them by the parent, and named slots, which let you target specific areas of a component with custom content. It's all about letting the parent control what's displayed within your component. Okay, so let's talk about Vue.js slots. Both regular and scoped slots are ways to share content between parent and child components, a really important concept. But here's the key difference: regular slots are like giving your child component a blank container, and you can literally throw anything into it. Child then figures out how to display that anything. Scoped slots, on the other hand, are much more specific. They're like saying, hey child component, *q**, decide what to do with this content based on what I'm expecting in your props. It provides a defined context and prevents accidental data mismatching. Okay, let's talk about dynamic components. Basically, they give you the power to render different Vue components at runtime rather than having to hardcode them in your template. Imagine you have a product page and a category listing. Instead of creating two separate templates, you can use a single component that renders either a product or a category based on what's in your data. This makes your code much more reusable and adaptable when things change. It's all about using a variable to tell Vue which component to display. Okay, let's talk about handling forms in Vue. The first thing you want to do is bind your form fields directly to reactive data properties within your component's data. This makes sure that when the user types something into a field, it updates your data automatically and vice versa. Then, you'll typically use the submit event on your form and associate it with a method to handle what happens when the form is submitted. We can also leverage computed properties like isValidating, which checks if any required fields are empty, allowing us to disable the submit button until everything is filled in. Finally, there are several ways to validate. You can build custom validation rules using your data and logic, or consider external libraries for more complex scenarios. Okay, let's talk about mixins in Vue.js. They're a really handy tool when you have some code like upper functions or shared data that you want to use across multiple components. Basically, a mixin is just a JavaScript object that holds all of that reusable stuff. You import it into the component where you need it, and suddenly everything in that object becomes available to the component as if it were part of its own code. It's like taking the best bits from a helper and adding them directly to your components. They're great for things like data formatting or input validation, or even just sharing some common data properties between components that have similar logic. Just keep in mind that with mixins comes the potential for naming conflicts if you're not careful, so, especially in larger projects, you might want to explore other approaches like computed properties or Vue's composition API. Okay, let's talk about how we share code between components in Vue. Back in Vue 2, we use something called mixins, basically JavaScript functions that you would sprinkle into your component options to add reusable logic. They were pretty handy but could get messy quickly when you had a lot of them, and they weren't always easy to understand where the code was coming from. Vue 3 changed things up with the composition API, which uses something called composibles. Think of composibles as functions that are specifically designed for reusability. They are more structured, easier to test, and generally lead to cleaner code compared to mixins. It's a big step forward. Okay, let's talk about the composition API in Vue 3. It represents a significant shift in how we build components. Basically, it moves us away from organizing our code by what the component does, like using data, methods, and computed properties, to focusing on how that logic is actually implemented. The composition API introduces composibles, which are functions you can reuse across your project, making your code much more organized. readable, and easier to maintain. They group related logic together, promoting better structure and reducing duplicated code. Okay, let's talk about reactivity in Vue 3. The Composition API provides a cleaner way to manage this automatically. Ref is your go-to for handling primitive types like numbers and strings, as well as simple arrays. Think of it like creating a wrapper around the value that allows Vue to track changes. When you change the value property of the ref object like setInCount value equals 5, you know something has changed and updates your Vue accordingly. Now, if you're dealing with more complex data structures like objects or arrays, you'll use reactive. This function wraps the entire object or array in a proxy that monitors any changes made to its properties. For example, if you change person age using reactive, Vue will automatically update your Vue. The key is that both methods return a reactive object and you access the underlying value through the value property. Okay, let's talk about provide and inject. Think of them as a way for Vue components to communicate with each other without constantly passing data up the component tree. The provide option lets a parent component make something, maybe some configuration settings or a utility function available. And then, any child component that needs it can use inject to grab it. It's super handy for things like themes, authentication tokens, or even global services. Essentially, it creates a shared context across your application. Okay, let's talk about dealing with asynchronous operations in Vue. Basically, a lot of things we want to do like fetching data from an API or setting up timers often take some time. That's where async/await comes in handy. Promises are the core concept here. They represent the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation. Async/await makes using promises much easier to read and write. Think of it as a more elegant way to handle those promises, letting you write code that looks and feels like synchronous code. And remember, always handle errors, don't just assume everything will go smoothly. Okay, let's talk about server-side rendering, or SSR, in Vue.js. Basically, it's a way of rendering your Vue app on the server instead of just in the browser. Think of it like this: when you make a request to your website, the server doesn't just send raw JavaScript, it actually builds out the entire HTML page for you first. Then, that fully rendered HTML is sent to the user's browser. This offers some serious advantages, especially around SEO and initial loading speed, giving users something quickly. Okay, so let's talk about Next.js. It's essentially a framework built with Vue.js. Not asterisk instead of asterisk it. Think of it as taking all the great things about Vue, its easy to learn and flexible nature, and adding extra tools that make building bigger, more complex applications much easier. It's particularly useful if you're working on projects where SEO is important or where you want really fast initial load times. Next handles a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff for you, like automatically splitting your code into smaller chunks so only the necessary parts are loaded, and it makes creating navigation super simple using files in your project directory. Okay, let's talk about Vue DevTools. It's a total game changer when you're working with Vue.js. Basically, it's an extension for Chrome and Firefox that lets you peek under the hood of your application right within the browser's developer tools. It's like having a super detailed inspector for your Vue components. You can see exactly what data is flowing through them, what props they're receiving, and how their methods are being called all in real time. This makes debugging so much easier. You can also track user events to see how the app responds to clicks and key presses. And if you're concerned about performance, Vue DevTools has a profiling tool that helps you pinpoint any slow rendering or inefficiencies. Okay, let's talk about error boundaries in Vue. They are a really useful tool for making your applications more robust and user-friendly. Essentially, an error boundary is like a safety net. It catches errors that might otherwise crash your entire app. When you define an error boundary component, you wrap specific sections of your code where you know there's a chance things could go wrong. If an error happens within those wrapped components, the error boundary steps in and displays a fallback UI instead of just showing a blank screen or crashing the whole thing. This keeps your application running smoothly even when unexpected errors occur, giving users a better experience. Okay, let's talk about the virtual DOM in Vue.js. Basically, it's like a copy of your actual web page that lives in memory. Instead of directly tweaking the visible page every time something changes, which can be slower and resource intensive, Vue first creates this virtual copy. Then it compares the old version to the new one, figuring out exactly what needs to change. It's like a smart editor that only makes the small, specific edits needed instead of rewriting everything from scratch. This clever trick is what lets Vue make updates really fast and efficiently. Okay, let's talk about keeping your Vue applications running smoothly. Performance is key. Nobody wants a slow website or app. Vue's virtual DOM is amazing at updating the screen efficiently, but even that can get bogged down if things aren't optimized. We want to make sure components only update when they truly need to. Think about using key attributes and techniques like vmemo or should component update. Also, let's avoid doing too much heavy lifting inside watchers or computed properties. Keep those calculations streamlined. Lazy loading is your friend for images and components that aren't immediately needed, and code splitting can drastically reduce the initial load time. Finally, if you're dealing with events like scrolling or resizing, use debouncing or throttling to prevent performance bottlenecks. Don't forget to check out Vue DevTools. It's a powerful tool for finding exactly where your application might be slowing down. Okay, let's tackle a common Vue.js interview question. What's the difference between vbind and vmodel? Think of vbind as a simple way to connect your data to an HTML element. It just copies the value from your data directly into the element's attribute or property. It's like telling the DOM, hey, use this value. On the other hand, vmodel is more powerful. It creates a two-way asterisk link between a form input and your Vue data. So, when you type something in the input field, it automatically updates your data, and if you change the data in your component, the input field gets updated too. It's super convenient for handling forms. Okay, let's talk about event handling in Vue.js. It's a really important part of making your applications interactive and responsive. Basically, Vue uses events like when someone clicks a button or types something into a form to trigger specific actions within your application. We bind these events to data properties using the v-on directive, which is shorthand for @, and then we define a method in our component that gets executed when the event happens. As you can see in this example, we're binding the click event of a button to a myFunction method. When the user clicks the button, that method runs, increments a counter, and logs it to the console. Okay, let's talk about lazy loading in Vue.js. Essentially, it's like only loading what you need when you need it, delaying the loading of things that aren't immediately essential. This is super helpful for speeding up your website's initial load time and saving bandwidth, especially for users with slower connections. In Vue, you can easily use dynamic import syntax to do this. It's a really powerful technique for making your apps more performant. Okay, let's talk about transitions and animations in Vue. These are fantastic tools for making your apps feel more polished and responsive. The core idea is that you use the component to manage how a component appears or disappears. It's not just showing or hiding, like with VShow. Transitions work by triggering animations, which directly change properties on the DOM element. You'll want to wrap the components you want to animate in the tag and use props like fade in or fade out to control the animation style. Remember, for smooth transitions, always prefer vtransition over vshow. I've included a simple example showing how this works. It toggles a paragraph, and when it changes, it animates in or out. Okay, let's talk about key modifiers in Vue's event handling system. Essentially, they are extra characters you can add to an event name that pass specific information to your handler function. Think of them like little hints. They don't change the event itself, it's still the same event object, but they give you access to additional data. Common ones include prevent, which stops the default browser behavior, like a link automatically navigating or a form submitting. Then there's stop, similar to prevent but for stopping propagation up the DOM tree. Finally, capture lets you capture the event at the element itself, useful when you need early handling. Okay, let's talk about the key attribute in Vue.js is v-for. Think of it like a unique ID tag for each item you're rendering in your list. Without it, every time your data changes even just a little bit, Vue has to completely rebuild the entire list in the DOM. That can be really slow, especially with large lists. The key tells Vue how to efficiently track and update those individual items. It's crucial to use a stable identifier from your data, usually an ID, as the key, so that Vue can reuse existing elements when things change instead of always creating new ones. Don't use array indexes as keys, they can cause problems if you reorder or remove items. Okay, let's talk about global event buses in Vue. They are incredibly useful for connecting different parts of your application that don't have a direct parent-child relationship. Essentially, you create a central bus, we often call it $bus, and components can publish events to it, and other components can subscribe to those events and react accordingly. The key is using Vue provide to make this bus accessible everywhere in your app. Then, when you want to trigger an event, you use the emit method on the bus, passing any necessary data as arguments. Finally, components listen for these events using $bus on, and they'll be automatically notified whenever that event is emitted. Okay, let's talk about how Vue components communicate with each other. A really common interview question is figuring out the difference between emit and props. Think of emit as sending a signal up the component tree, like when a button gets clicked in a child component and tells its parent that something happened. On the flip side, props are how data flows down from a parent to a child component. They are essentially providing information or configurations to the child. It's really important to remember these are unidirectional signals: go up, data goes down. The syntax is different too. You use the emit method on the component itself, and you pass props as arguments when defining your template. Okay, let's talk about testing Vue components, a really important topic in interviews. When asked about this, it's good to know you have a few different approaches. You can start with unit tests, which are great for checking the individual logic of your components. Then, you might move on to integration tests to make sure they're working well together. And finally, end-to-end tests simulate how a user would actually use your application, making sure everything flows smoothly. Thinking about strategies like TDD or BDD can help you write more effective and maintainable tests too. Good luck. Okay, let's talk about testing in Vue.js, a really important topic for interviews. There are several fantastic tools you'll likely encounter. Jest is a very popular choice, especially because it's fast and has great support for mocking things like API calls. Vitis is becoming increasingly popular as well, since it builds on the speed of Vite. Then you have Vue Test Utils, which is specifically designed to work with Vue components, making it easy to trigger events and check data. And for end-to-end testing, meaning testing the whole application, flow, Cypress and Playwright are both excellent options. They let you simulate a real user interacting with your app. Make sure you're familiar with these, as they show employers you have practical experience building robust Vue applications. Okay, let's talk about what's new and exciting in Vue 3 compared to its predecessor Vue 2. The biggest shift we see is the introduction of the composition API. It's a completely different way to organize your component logic. Think of it as a more modular and reusable approach, making code easier to understand and maintain. Then there's Teleport, which allows you to move parts of your UI directly into another location without affecting its styling. For admin, simplify template syntax too, letting you render multiple children without wrapping them in a single parent element. Performance has also improved dramatically thanks to Vue 3's proxy-based reactivity system, and it all results in a smaller initial bundle size. And if you're using TypeScript, the support is much more robust now. It's worth keeping up with these changes, as they represent a significant evolution in how we build Vue applications. Thank you for watching.